it's the gateway to all these other beings. It's a very good guide. But there are other beings that we can connect to that sometimes come with great force to connect with us that may not be so beneficial. So one classical type of being is the ones known in the Western tradition, having to do with great emanations of light. And so the term Lucifer means light bearer. And so Lucifer is a particular type of spiritual being that's a great spiritual being of light. It's not what we think of as the devil or Satan. That was something that got lost in the esoteric traditions. Some traditions still know there's a difference between what we call Lucifer and what we call Satan or the devil, such as in the Catholic Church. The Jesuits will talk about that difference sometime. Because how could it possibly be that Lucifer, the light bearer, appears as this dark, sclerotic being in the earth sort of things? Two different things. So the Luciferic beings do something for every person on the spiritual path. They give us a certain type of spiritual resistance. They give us great inspiration. Every time you want to do drugs and party and have a good time and get innate perceptions of higher worlds without doing a lot of effort, the Luciferic beings are having a good time with you. They love to party, they love to have all types of powerful experiences. They're not necessarily bad beings in some greater sense. They have certain things they do that are a benefit, but they're here to have a certain attractive pull in a spiritual direction. If we don't counterbalance that with our own good common sense, what will happen is the person will become either connected to very abstract, illusory forms of spirituality, so they become very airy-fairy and ungrounded, or they'll get into various types of addictive behaviors, things of that kind. So one thing that the Luciferic beings are connected to that I want to make you aware of is something that was known in classical traditions but almost forgotten today that's really important to know. And that is, as soon as you start to get a little bit of spiritual knowledge, a little bit of spiritual power, you can do certain things, it's actually starting to work, it's a given that a Luciferic being will come in at that point, a great being of light, and say, yes, you're starting to wake up. Not only are you this fantastic spiritual being that you're waking up to be, but in fact, you're even more than you imagined. You are this fantastic ascended master so-and-so, and blah, 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 blah. And they'll give you all this ego inflation stuff. Now, let's say you are actually the fantastic ascended master so-and-so. The actual experience of that with the guardian angel is quite different. The experience of it with the guardian angel is one of responsibility. So it's not like, hey, I'm the great ascended master so-and-so, so I'm going to wear a robe and get my own little cult and I'm going to like go off to the races with my own thing and everybody's going to adore me. That's the Luciferic inspiration, ego inflation. The one that comes in with the guardian angel and the more beneficial beings of what we might call the central pillar is this feeling of, oh, I actually have a great task, I have a great responsibility. It's not going to be a good time. I actually am going to have to sacrifice parts of my life the average person would not have to sacrifice because of the level that I'm capable of working. That's a very important difference for the internal experience. But because people don't know about this, they say, oh, I've been approached by this great being of light and it told me all this stuff, and then they get ego inflation and God knows what they get into. So everybody starts their own little cult. It doesn't end up well. We see this all the time because people have lost knowledge of spiritual science. They've lost the understanding of the process of initiation. Now, the countervailing force with that is what's referred to in classical times, in the old Persian Zoroastrian tradition, as Engra Mainyu, or Ahriman, the dark lord of this earth, that then became for the Egyptians Set. And then Set, when the Hebrews left Egypt, became Ha-Satan, which means in Hebrew the adversary. And it became our concept of Satan. This also became the archetype for the demiurge, for the Gnostics. This is a real being. We don't have to freak out about it. Again, your ability to see will be limited to your ability to not react. So, I'm not telling you anything that hasn't always been there. These particular beings have the function of the opposite pole. Luciferic beings are trying to pull us way up into the spiritual world. They're the ones that tell us the physical world is Maya, it's an illusion. There's no purpose to be here. Get off the cycle of karma and reincarnation. Just go back up to the spiritual world. Whereas the Ahrimanic beings are the exact opposite. First, they try to tell you that you're a biochemical accident. Not only are you not a spiritual being, there's not even any purpose for you to be here. Various weird chemicals came together and you ended up, but then you're going to die and that's going to be it. So it's all a Darwinian survival of the fittest. Get yours before somebody else does. It's fine to take advantage of other people because that's the law of the jungle, baby, and that's how it works. So these beings try to get us to accept that we're just a physical being, no spirituality. But let's say that you did then begin to remember that you're a spiritual being and you began to learn some esoteric teachings, then they come in with another temptation that become highly dangerous. And that is, let's say you understand, oh, I am a fractal of the Godhead, and just as everything in creation came about through the mind power of the Godhead, I too carry mind power. I have the capacity to create anything with the power of a focused mind. And so if you do that with an open heart and some type of beneficial orientation to the world, then that's great. You'll start creating all types of beneficial elementals and healing people, and God knows what wonders you'll do for the world. But if, on the other hand, you still have all these darker venal impulses where you're driven by your desires. I want so-and-so to do this for me. This person will give me money. This person will give me sex. This person will, whatever it is I want from them, they're going to provide it. And I can actually put a thought in their mind. I can begin to manipulate them in certain ways. That's then the tact taken by these beings once you begin to go on the spiritual path. They'll say, yes, again, Darwinian law of the fittest, but you're the fittest now because now you've remembered you are a spiritual being and you have spiritual powers they don't remember that they have. So it's fine to take advantage of them. It's like what Nietzsche talked about in his work about the superior man. It's fine for the superior man to dominate the herd because that's the natural way. So we have these two impulses that will come in. And you'll find people as they begin to awaken spiritually, they didn't do enough inner purification, and they basically become gray or black magicians. They start misusing their mind power to manipulate other people rather than liberating other people with it. And then on the other side, again, you've got the more luciferic side, the more aspect of the light forces, which will pull you away from physical incarnation so you don't accomplish anything here. I just want to have a good time. So knowing these two things are very important because, again, it's very common that people will get this impulse with the light, the luciferic side, and they'll think, oh, it's a real being of light that's telling me all these great things about myself. If it's inflating your ego about how incredible you are and all of the wonderful privileges that you now get, that's not it. If you remember you're somebody really significant, then it's going to mean that you have a great responsibility. And you're going to have to give up a lot of your life that other people would have for their activity. And this is something really quite significant to remember and to understand. So this is a background then for the practices that we're going to do today. These are some fundamental types of spiritual initiation practices. They're meant to make you aware of certain aspects of the structure of your subtle bodies. And remember we talked about on Saturday that it's the capacity to structure aspects of your subtle body through repeated activities, repeated ways that you use your thinking, your feeling, your will, create particular energetic movements in the subtle bodies. And those get stabilized, just like we talked about with Dascalos and the symbol of life that he developed in his subtle bodies to give him the powers that he had. Then all types of more advanced things become possible. So one of the ideas behind this then is that when we learn spiritual exercises, the best way to do it in the modern form, because in the modern form we don't give away our power to another teacher. A teacher is just a spiritual friend. They're completely fallible. They have their own weird stuff. And where they're wise, listen to them. And where they're not, then look somewhere else. But you don't have to give your power away to a spiritual teacher. A spiritual teacher is a spiritual friend in the modern tradition. It's not a thing where you let them take the place of your higher self, as was done in ancient traditions. And so, with this particular type of work, as we're working on the structures in the subtle bodies, the teacher has the responsibility to describe to you what the practice is going to be and the reason that you're doing it. Because you go to many spiritual groups and they say, okay, we're going to do a spiritual practice. Everybody close your eyes. We're going to blah, 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 blah. Well, you're off to the races. You're on the locomotive. You don't know where you're going. That's not a way to know how to do things fully consciously. So there's a certain responsibility, I feel, in the modern day to explain to people the practice that they're about to do and why you're doing it. What's the purpose of it? The person can choose to do it or not. And along with this, in talking about the type of practice that we're doing and the purpose of the practice, we have the doing of the exercises in such a way that at the end of any spiritual exercise, we stop and we tune in internally and we become aware of exactly what effect the practice has on our subtle bodies. And so you'll find at the end of multiple practices, I'm going to say, I want you to have your eyes closed and just tune in to the feeling of the energy in and around you and ask yourself the silent question, how has this practice structured my body of energy? Because everything that you do structures your body of energy. What I mean by that is that you'll find that certain energy centers of your body become highly activated by certain practices, while others may even become sedated or less active. Or certain currents of energy will begin to run in the body. And once you become aware of that, you'll get the habit of, after any exercise you've learned from any teacher, any tradition, to always pause at the end, tune in internally and say, how has that structured my subtle body? How did that affect me? Because at the end of the day, in the modern path of spiritual science, and what we think of as the modern independent path of initiation, which most people are on today in the West, we have a responsibility to understand and make our own choices. We can't understand unless we have a fully clear, complete picture of what we're working with. That's a challenge of spiritual science. You have to gain that for yourself. Understand the big picture of what it is that we're doing. And then you need to make your choices of, I have X number of years left. Most people don't know how many years we have left, but let's say we all have a very limited number of years before we kick the bucket. That's a limited amount of time to actually achieve something in this lifetime. Number one, we have to accomplish what it was that we pledged to do as acts of service to help other people in the world. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you the vast majority of people that I'm aware of their karma are not manifesting fully what they incarnated to do. This has actually gotten worse as the years go on, because challenges of earthly life are becoming increasingly difficult. Some people ask me, how is it that you teach stuff about radiation? You have this background in the Marine Corps, you teach us stuff about radiation. How does that connect with the spiritual science stuff? Seems completely different. It's not different. What the radiation does is it creates brain fog. The radiation is actually an obstacle to becoming spiritually self-aware. Sometimes you got to go and you got to clean up the basement before you can start working on building the cathedral. And so, if we can't get our energy system coherent, higher level work is not possible to exactly what it is that you experienced from it. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need to make decisions about, in my limited amount of time and energy that I have every day, the limited number of years I have left, I need to make an informed decision. What am I going to do with my time and energy? You don't have time to do every spiritual practice that is taught on the metaphysical circuit today, or everything taught in the Vedic and Buddhist and God knows what other traditions are out there today. You've got to choose the ones that are going to have the most important effect for structuring your subtle bodies that you can take past the gate of death, transform your spiritual destiny. And don't believe anything that I'm telling you. I'm giving you a series of concepts here. If they're true, then they'll reveal themselves in time and working with them to be true. Doesn't matter if I claim they're true or not. If they're false, doesn't matter what I claim. If I say, I am the reincarnation of the great ascended hoo-hoo, and so you should believe everything I say, that won't mean anything. It's all complete nonsense. It's either true or it's not true. You're going to need to make the decision. You're going to need to understand what practices to do every day to begin to structure your subtle bodies. So, that's our basic introduction for today.